Creatine is not just a muscle supplement, it's an energy buffer. And that's exactly why it turns up in conversations about muscle strength, about brain capacity, about sleep loss, about aging, and about kidney function. And some even talk about hair loss, right? And this is also why you have one man say, it changed my training completely, while another man says, it destroyed my labs and made my gut feel terrible. And honestly, most men approach creatine completely backwards because they ask, should I take 5 or 10 grams? Will it damage my kidneys? Should I load it? What about my hair? And they're useful questions, don't get me wrong, but they're not the right first question. Because the first question, in many instances, is what problem am I trying to solve? Because if you're tired in the afternoon, your training is inconsistent, your sleep is not refreshing, your libido is not where it's supposed to be, and your blood work came back normal according to your doctor, maybe creatine will help you with one layer of cellular energy. But it's not going to tell you if your issue is with your thyroid, your free testosterone, your kidney markers, maybe you're not eating enough, maybe you're sleeping bad, maybe it's due to chronic inflammation, right? And that's exactly why I put the free blood work cheat sheet in the first link in the description, because that will show you if creatine is even useful for you or if it's just misleading and a waste of your time. And by the end of this video, you'll understand what creatine actually does, why it can affect strength and brain function, why the kidney and hair loss debate is more nuanced than you would think, whether loading is necessary, and what meat and coffee does to change the whole context. And I'm also going to tell you when creatine is the wrong thing to focus on first. My name is Al-Najaar. I'm a medical doctor, and I specialize in men's hormonal health, fertility, and performance. And I've worked with thousands of men. In my clinical work, the difference between a man who does what he's supposed to do and gets good results is not information, because you can always find information. The difference is the interpretation of that information with the correct context, which is his body, his labs, his symptoms, and the standard he's trying to live at. Because a very common type of man comes to me with this type of story or with this pattern, right? Because he works out, he gets his protein, he tries to sleep so he can recover as good as possible. Maybe he's even bought some supplements, zinc, ashwagandha, magnesium. Maybe he's even gotten on the creatine train. And maybe he's doing a bit more advanced stuff like getting his sleep tracker. Maybe he even has a glucose monitor. And so he's not lazy, he's not uninformed, but he's still tired at the wrong time of day. His workouts are inconsistent. His sleep is not making him feel refreshed when he wakes up in the morning. His libido is not where it's supposed to be, and his little friend is gone. And then he asks, should I take 5 or 10 grams of creatine? And that might matter, but it's rarely the first correct question to ask. Because if free testosterone is low, if ferritin is low, if he has sleep apnea, if he has chronic inflammation, if he's not eating enough, or his kidney markers aren't that good to look at, maybe because he has good muscle mass and he's taking creatine already, then the supplement dose is not the strategy. It's part of a bigger picture. And so if we look at the screen, this is the mechanism of creatine. This is how it works, right? Because your body runs on ATP. And to simplify it, every time a cell has used ATP, it turns into ADP because of the phosphate. And one of the issues is that the body doesn't store that much ATP at once. It has to create it all the time. And this is where creatine really comes into play. Because creatine helps recycle the ATP, so it goes from ADP and receives back another phosphate and becomes ATP again. And so that's why creatine is so obvious in the gym, because it's used, it works very well when you do hard sets, when you do sprints, when you have repeated contractions, and strength work all stress that rapid energy system. But muscle is not the only tissue that needs this type of energy. Your brain does, your retina, so your eye, your heart, and your reproduction system. And so when people frame creatine as only for bodybuilders, that's simply too small. Because it's true that creatine is most visible in muscle, but the energy system it supports is not limited to muscle only. And that exact mechanism explains why creatine can be useful. Now, one might ask, is this just marketing? Because why is everyone suddenly talking about creatine? Yes, creatine is being pushed harder now. And it's true that some of these companies are very happy about having a very cheap substance that they can produce get a lot of attention. But that doesn't mean that this type of nutrient is fake. Creatine has hundreds of peer-reviewed articles behind it, and I will leave a link for all the articles that I'll refer to in the description. So if you want to dive deeper, you can always do that. There's going to be the links there. But there was a recent review that looked at kidney damage, hair loss, water retention, loading. And with a creatine monohydrate, it's still the standard, and other common questions as well. So the better criticism, is not that creatine is fake because people are start selling it now. The better question or criticism is, am I being sold creatine instead of a proper interpretation of the whole context? Because if you look at it, the evidence is real, the marketing is definitely noisy, but the context is really mandatory. And this is what I care about, because if you have brain fog, if you have fatigue, if you have low libido, poor training response, creatine may help overall, but it's not going to interpret your hormonal system, your thyroid markers, your long-term blood sugar, or remember to have your fertility goals in mind or your medical context. And then we can talk about dosing. And the next question would be, do you need to load creatine? What does loading mean? It means, do you have to take a high dosage to start with? And for most healthy adults, the answer is no. Because if someone takes 20 grams of protein per day, split into a few days, compared to someone who takes 5 grams every day consistently, they're going to end up in the same place at the end. So the boring answer is often the correct one, because daily consistency will beat loading. But there are two caveats, because some of the brain studies they did with creatine where they look at sleep deprivation, we had one study that showed that people who were sleep deprived for 21 hours, they took one loaded dosage, so a high dosage once, they found improvements in cognitive markers and performance. And so that's the context about the research. Because if you take a large dose and you get nausea, bloating, you get loose stools, cramps, or you sleep very bad, it could be the one large dose and not creatine itself that was poisonous to you. And so this is why you have to look at the whole context, right? So if you load, you will have faster saturation, yes. But if you do this daily with smaller dosages, it's going to be easier for you probably. And you're also going to avoid some of the dose response side effects. And again, the context here matters, right? The side effects often follow dose and the speed. And now let's talk about the kidney, because creatinine is a marker and it's not the whole kidney. So there's a difference between creatine and creatinine. And in lab work, we measure the estimated GFR, which is how we look at kidney function, by using a formula that takes creatinine into account. And creatinine is a breakdown product related to the creatine metabolism. And so if your serum creatinine rises, your estimated GFR, so your kidney function, will look worse. But it doesn't mean automatically that you have kidney damage. And there was another study, a systematic review and meta-analysis actually. So they looked at different studies and they showed that taking creatine compared with control increased creatinine in the blood, but it didn't significantly change the estimated GFR. And this is the nuance, because creatine can make it look like you've damaged your kidneys. But then you have the opposite. Just because it rose and you say, it's just creatine, that's not an excuse to ignore proper kidney disease. And this is why, again, I say this, the context really matters here. The timing, the dosing, and what else are you doing? Did you just have a hard workout the day before you went and got blood work done? And this video is obviously not medical advice. It's for information only, so I can't advise you, obviously, right? Because you're watching a YouTube video. But what generally you could do as another good marker of kidney function is looking at cystatin C. You can look at your albumin to creatinine ratio. You can look at your vascular context. So do you have high blood pressure, right? And then your medical history. Did you just work out? What about your muscle mass? Do you take any medication? And did you drink enough water? And this is exactly why the blood work cheat sheet exists. This is why I created it. So it's easier for men to interpret their own results, or at least know what they should test for. Again, that's the first link in the description below. If you're someone who wants the whole package, the whole information system, and you want someone to think for you instead, you can join my Apex group program, where we together will work on making you feel superhuman. There's also going to be a link in the description for that below. Next, let's talk about hair loss. Because with hair loss, it's very important. Always, generally, evidence first and then ego last. And this stays alive because a small study where they looked at DHT in rugby players rose during creatine supplementation. And so because there is some type of link between DHT and androgenic hair loss, so hair loss for men, this is what you see with the bald patterns, right? They said that because your creatinine increases your DHT, it's automatically gonna give you hair loss. But that's simply not how medicine works. You can't just do that. And that's why we have researchers who actually took that question and tested it. And so there was a randomized trial, which is where they give people creatine and they give another group placebo, so nothing that's active in the body. And they looked at DHT, they looked at testosterone, they looked at hair follicle density to really look at if taking creatine increases hair loss. And they found no significant difference between men who took creatine and the placebo group. So the fair answer is that current evidence don't support the belief that creatine causes hair loss. Now, yes, it was a small study, but it's the most accurate study we have in terms of methods because they tested creatine and hair loss. But obviously, if you take creatine and you start noticing hair loss or shedding, you have to put that into context, right? Obviously, hair loss is genetic. You have all the environmental factors. And so you should probably look at the whole context behind how you live your life, your calories, your sleep, your stress. Look at the foundation. This is what I talk about all the time in my videos, right? The foundation, which is diet, it's sleep, it's stress management, and it's exercise. Look at that. That usually gives you the answer to most of your questions. Now let's talk about something that's very interesting, which is myostatin. Because another claim is that creatine is a myostatin inhibitor, and myostatin helps your body break down muscle mass. So if you block that, you will block the breakdown of muscle mass, which means you will be able to keep more of your muscle mass. And that will be a very nice story, but it's simply too simple. Simply too simple. That was good. But to be serious, there was a study that showed that resistance training decreased myostatin, and this was a group where they also took creatine. So you can't simply say that creatine decreased the myostatin, so it inhibited myostatin. We can say that training and creatine inhibited myostatin. And the accurate medical statement is that we can see that training and creatine has a higher association to inhibition of myostatin than training alone. And that's clinically different because creatine is not replacing the training here. There might be some symbiotic effect between the two, the training and the creatine, that then has downward effects to decreasing myostatin. And now something very interesting. Obviously, all of these points are interesting, but imagine you could stop sleeping. If you could stop sleeping by only taking creatine, wouldn't that be great? Because that is the next objection here. Some people say creatine helped them perform after a bad nights of sleep. Some say it worsened their insomnia. And honestly, both can be real signals. And like we mentioned before earlier in the video, there was a study done with people who were sleep deprived for 21 hours, and then they gave them a high dosage of creatine, which increased their cognitive cerebral energy markers and their cognitive performance. Another study showed that there were possible benefits to short-term memory and reasoning, but unclear effects on other variables across cognitive domains. And so my interpretation is that creatine can help during severe stress or sleep deprivation, but it's not a pill for you to avoid sleep at all. So it's not a replacement for sleep, and it's not a replacement for a hangover. And if it does give you insomnia, you should probably move it to a little bit earlier window during the day or stop it entirely. And now a practical question I get because I talk about the carnivore diet. So people ask me, what about meat? I get creatine from meat. And it's true, you can get creatine from meat and fish, but the dose you get from simply eating meat and fish is not the same as when you supplement 5, 10, 15 grams. So if you eat a lot of red meat, you will probably have a higher baseline intake of creatine compared to someone who was vegetarian, where the effects of creatine will probably be bigger. And so that doesn't make supplementation useless. It just changes the whole context of it. Now, personally, I eat a bunch of red meat and I still supplement creatine. Because if I remember correctly, you would probably need to eat 1 kilo of meat to get 5 grams of creatine. Maybe it's 2 grams, I can't remember. But 1 kilo of red meat, 2.2 pounds, just to get 2 to 5 grams of creatine. I mean, it's doable, but there are easier solutions to get your 5 grams or 10 grams or 15 grams of creatine. And so meat helps, right? The baseline intake can change the response. If you drink it in fresh coffee, for example, or if you drink it immediately, it's probably going to have a better effect than something that has been on the shelf for a long time. And then, do you need to drink a bunch of water? This is really where it gets important with hydration, right? Because it needs context. Are you working out? Are you going to a sauna? How much heat are you exposed to? Are you eating a high protein diet? Are you drinking alcohol? And what about electrolytes? All of these are very important for you to look at for the whole context in terms of how much water should you drink. Now, I learned this when I was playing football as a younger younger man. Going into the senior team's dressing room, I saw this just above the urinal. There was a poster with different colors of urine and then a text that went from dehydrated to overhydrated. And this was, funnily enough, my first time understanding what hydration even means. So, and it's still one of the best ways to look at for yourself to measure if you're hydrated, if you're dehydrated, or if you're overhydrated. Simply look at the color of your pee. And so, were we wrong about creatine? In some sense, yes, we were. Now, I've recommended creatine for years, and last year I changed my recommendation to an even higher dosage. If you want that, you should probably join the Apex Group program. We can talk more about that there. But more than what most people usually get recommended. What we were wrong about, though, is that it's not only for young men chasing a pump. Creatine is energy buffering that matters beyond the gym. This is what we talked about: the brain, the heart, the reproduction system, the eyes, and also brain stress and aging muscle belong in the conversation too. But we're still wrong if we think that creatine is the answer to every man's physiology, because simply it's not. You need more context, and it's not going to solve every single problem if you have underlying issues. And it's the exact same mistake men make with testosterone, TRT, if they take GLP-1s, if they take magnesium or other supplements. It's the exact same mistake, because tools follow interpretation, not the other way around. This is simply a tool, and creatine can be useful. I think it's amazing. It works very well if you understand the proper context around it. And if you feel worse on it, your experience matters enough to stop it entirely. Review the dosage, review the product, look at your hydration, and if you can't fix it, maybe creatine isn't going to work for you. So, here is the next step. If you want the low friction version, you can download the blood work cheat sheet. It's the first link in the description below. That's where I tell you which type of blood work to get done, so you can get the proper context and you can understand and know, first of all, what's your baseline, and second of all, where should you go to? What should you optimize for? And then you can start looking at some of this stuff. The supplementation, the magnesium, other vitamins, all these things, right? The blood work is essential for that. This is where we look at the hormonal markers, right? The kidney context, the metabolic signals, and the recovery markers. If you have that baseline in order, you can take the next step for yourself there. And if you're ready to actually take action and improve your health and feel superhuman, the Apex Group program is going to be the next step for you. There is also going to be a link in the description for that. This is where we look at your blood work. So I will look at your blood work. We'll look at your symptoms. We'll look at your sleep, your training, your nutrition. This is what I talked about, the foundation, right? Also the stress management. And then we'll figure out what the actual bottleneck is in your personal situation. And then we'll help you solve that so you can feel superhuman again, just like you did when you were 20 or 25. And that's for men who don't want the protocol from the internet, but something a bit more custom to them. Check the link out in the description to learn more about this type of program. And if you're not ready for that, that's fine. Go back, download the cheat sheet. It's free. Get an overview, and I'll make sure to send you enough valuable emails that you'll sign up and start working with me. So if you enjoyed this video, you should probably watch the next one, which is about normal testosterone and why you still feel off even though you're in the range. I'll also explain what you can do about it there. See you in the next one.